Test, test, 4, test, not on. Now it's on. Welcome everyone to the regular meeting of the Bethlehem Planning Commission. My name is Ron Malassi. I'm the chair of the meeting. Other Planning Commission members include on my immediate left, Mr. Matt Malozzi, Ms. Joy Cohen, and Mr. Eddie Burgos. We ask anyone in attendance at this time to silence your phone. We will follow the agenda that is listed. Each applicant will have a chance to present their project to the commission as their agenda item is called. Following that presentation, city staff will provide an overview of the city's comments and recommendation. Then the planning commission will have an opportunity to direct questions related to the project to both the applicant and city staff. Following planning commission discussion, interested parties will have an opportunity to comment on or ask questions related to the project. All interested parties will be asked to give their name and address for the record. Anyone here in attendance tonight, there is a sign-in sheet as well. We will adhere to a 5-minute time limit for each member of the public. We ask that all comments be related to the project under review and that all comments be related to the land uses of the project. Where there are a significant number of interested parties, we request that members of the public be concise and avoid repeating previously made assertions. After all interested parties have had an opportunity to speak, planning commission members will have a final opportunity to deliberate. The review of the planning commission is based on the provisions of the Saldo zoning ordinance and other municipal ordinances as applicable. Decisions will be based on these applicable ordinances, recommendation of the city, professional staff, pertinent public comment, and the public good. Our first item, there is a resident here. I'm going to switch the agenda up. The gentleman had asked to bring something to the attention of our city staff. And if that gentleman could step to the mic, please give your name and address for the record, and you can go on with your concern, and we'll move on from there.
Thank you, Chairman Malasky. My name is John McGeehan. I'm a Bethlehem businessman, retired special operator, that means you're a retired Green Beret for the rest of your life. But in any case, I'm here on 375 13th Avenue, and I'm concerned about the traffic on Broad Street and 13th. May I approach the bench here?
Yes.
I'm handing out maps of the west side of Bethlehem. Please look for 13th Avenue.
We'll share.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
In any case, please look at 13th Avenue. 17 years ago, I became in front of the board here and moved the traffic off 13th Avenue, which was heavy truck traffic, and we moved that straight down Broad Street to get to the south side, over 3rd Avenue and over the bridge. Our problem now is the continuous traffic. We're looking to try to get a light at 13th Avenue. 95% of the traffic moving from west to east down Broad Street, going to Bethlehem, or say South Bethlehem, uses 13th Avenue. Of all the through streets that cross Broad Street on the south side, 95% of the traffic goes down 13th Avenue. There's limited traffic that go down 2nd Avenue. 95% goes down 13th because it's one of the few through streets. There are some through streets, but they're too narrow for traffic, like 8th Avenue. You make a right on 8th, you get by Prospect, you're toast. You can't get down there, especially if a car comes at you. So I'm hoping that the board will consider, if they get federal dollars or state dollars, to look at a light at 13th. What's happening is people come from Allentown, they get to the top of the hill, they look at that light at 8th Avenue, they shift their speed. If they want to get there, people going 55, 60 miles an hour because the next stop is 8th Avenue. Then there's a light at 5th, then there's a light at 3rd. But they are flying over that hill when they leave up by the old Coca-Cola plant. So they got about 9 or 10 blocks, depending on that light, they're going to really be moving. We need something at that 13th Avenue. If we're going to get a light on Broad Street, that is the spot. I have not done a traffic count yet. I don't know if the city has either. I'm willing to put up my own money to do it if I have to, if I have to. But it's not a good situation for the city. Below us, we have the tennis court, the playground, we have the hospital, and we have the manor for the priest within 2 blocks of that light. Actually, 3 blocks for the tennis courts. So we are in need of slowing down the traffic here. And I would appreciate it the board would take a long look at this. If they are going to place something there on Broad Street, that they do it there. And anytime anybody would like me to go out and go over this with them and do a walkthrough, I'd be willing to take it. I'll take any questions from the board.
Thank you, Mr. McGee. And I want to, obviously, you took some time. It's something that's important to you. You took some time to put together the maps and the drawings here for us. Obviously, this is not, I would say, the venue to make a decision, but certainly your comments will get the ball rolling. I am going to recommend that it's on the record. Mr. Rosario put this in the minutes and pass along to city council, because obviously they would be very much involved. But the first and foremost thing would, I'm sure I don't know if you know Miss Tiffany Wells, who's a big part of our city staff in reference to transportation plans. Maybe if you want to drop her your card, that way you could move on. So if this allowed to get the ball rolling and so be it. We'll go from there. Ms. Heller, is there anything else we need to add when it comes to that?
No, I think before any traffic light or stop sign, there definitely needs to be a study. I think Tiffany can confirm that. So there's certainly some work that would need to be done. And of course, there's, the costs, et cetera. So we can take a look at it. I have no idea if the city's looked at something at that intersection before or not.
Anything else for Mr. McGee?
Is there also a plan for West Broad Street that was so referring back to, there's a lot of recommendations there. So maybe protecting the residential neighborhoods from cut through traffic. Was it specifically truck or all vehicles?
No, all vehicles. What we did years ago, 17 years ago, we moved the trucks off 13th. Very luckily, we did that. And they have now to go down Broad Street and go over the hill to hill. Instead of going down that little street we have, it didn't ever make any sense. And the city took it to heart and changed all that for me. And the residents of the west side of Bethlehem appreciate that, to say the least.
Thank you, Mr. McGee. We appreciate your time, and we will get the ball rolling at
Okay,
least.
thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Mulaski and the board for letting me see you tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If
Our-
Mr. Barker was here, he'd have something to say. It's the
Sure,
west
that's
side.
his side. Our next agenda item is the approval of the January 13 minutes. Any discussion on the minutes as read? We have a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from January 13th.
Motion made by Ms. Cohen. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Burgos. Roll, please.
Mr. Malowski,
Yes.
Mr. Malozzi,
Yes.
Mr. Virgos,
Yes.
Ms. Cohen,
Yes.
Motion carries. Our next agenda item tonight, we have a site plan review at 2897 Easton Avenue. Will the presenter take a few minutes, do whatever you need to do to get prepared? You can introduce yourself and may begin.
I think we're ready. Is this
Thank you,
mic's
Mr.
on?
Hood.
Jim Holzinger for the applicants, Dominic Villani and John Tallarico. I want to mention to the commission at the outset, the reason we're here is that we're planning to go to the zoning hearing board later this month to ask for a use variance. This property at 2897 Easton Avenue is zoned RS, and we're proposing a multifamily development, and RS does not allow multifamily at all. As I'm sure you know, the RS is one of the more limited options with respect to uses within the city. This property has approximately 119,612 square feet. And I think what we're going to propose later, or as we go through this, is reasonable for the lot. But what we'd like to do, if we could approach, because we don't have an easel.
Yes, please.
Not all of our stuff. I'm going to ask Dominic to identify what this shows.
Your name, sir, for the record.
Dominic Bolani,
Thank you.
709 Denny's Place. Bethlehem.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney.
Okay, this depicts the lot here. It's approximately 2.74 acres, I believe, 119,000 square feet. It's directly across from the giant shopping center plaza located south on the south side of Easton Avenue.
And Mr. Wright, can you know what was on this property up to approximately 2006?
Yes, there was a commercial greenhouse that was Caspian Nursery.
Okay, and I'm going to just step back there. Are you aware of a prior use approval for this property?
Yes.
And for the record, I actually represented the applicant at the time. It was a Christopher Valianatos. We came into the city to ask for zoning relief to build a commercial office retail center. We asked for a special exception to change from a non-conforming use to commercial nursery to the, I'll call it a small strip mall with multiple uses. One of the realities for the zoning board at that time was that they recognized that it was probably inappropriate zone with the RS designation. It is on a busy arterial. It is across from the shopping center CS. It is a highly traveled route. And they recognized that something other than the limited RS uses at the time were necessary. We made the comparison to CL zoning at the time from limited commercial. And that was the basis for that 2007 decision. They basically said that we could do a strip mall that had the uses listed in the CL zone. We had certain conditions that no one user could be greater than 4,000 square feet. But the point was, the zoning board at that time thought that that was a good transitional use between the CS and now the residential behind this property. What we then what happened was the approval was granted for the variance or for the special exception. The then developer, who was out of New York, we're finalizing that approval. And for some reason, probably the economics and the economy at the time, that whole plan fell by the wayside. So roughly since 2000, end of 2006, early 2007, this property has been vacant. There's no activity on it. Development has come up all around. So we felt at this point that strip malls or small retail centers, as like I would think we might all know, they're starting to lose. They're losing their value. They're losing their interest. People aren't going to these types of facilities anymore. You know, with the pandemic and everything, we've learned to shop online and do whatever. But in any event, we thought that a multifamily development here would be appropriate. What we then did was we looked to the CL zoning district to see if this were considered appropriate CL zoning before. And again, we couldn't ask for a rezoning then or now because we only have a little over 2 acres. I would submit to the commission that it would constitute spot zoning. I think you have to have a minimum of 10 or an extension. I don't think you would want to extend the CS zone across the street. So we recognize again, like we did in 07, that we're limited to what the zoning board could grant relief on. And again, now we have in the code that we come here first And just on a recommendation for the use before the board. And we're not asking you to approve any relief. We'd have to come back here or whatever. Now, what I'd like to do is show the plan that was approved back in 2007. This was the plan. This was the retail center. And what happened was it came in, and then there was for delivery trucks to go around back. It was an L shape. And like I say, it was kind of a flex building, but no unit could be greater than 4,000 square feet. And like I said, at the time, we thought this was ideal. You know, we were doing flex buildings like this all over the valley, all over the city at that time. But today, obviously, we don't see as much. So this, like I say, this has gone by the wayside, but you can see where we're at with respect to it. So now, we're coming in, and this is the plan that would be shown, or a version of a plan shown to the zoning board. And this plan shows 54 units, but we're going to talk about that because we had some other ideas we wanted to update Darlene with respect to it. And what I want to do, if I could bear with me a minute, I created a little chart of where we're lacking with respect to the zoning code. And bear in mind, RS does really not allow anything related to other than single family housing. So it's kind of a cheat sheet in a way that we can all follow. So obviously the overriding one is the use variance. That's not listed here. But the first one is lot area per dwelling unit. RS only allows single family, and it would require 8,000 square feet. If we applied the CL zoning district standard, the CL references RT. So the number of units per RT would be 1 for every 1,200 square feet. Applied to this property, you could probably do close to 90 units, 89 or 90. Apart from that, though, in the far right column, we're saying if we did something that, for calculations purposes, say if up to 60 units, we'd be a little under 2,000 a square foot or square feet per unit. So if this were zoned CL, which I think would be the appropriate zoning for this property, we could do this many units, but we're not providing, we're not requesting that. We're still looking at the 50 to 60 range. The maximum building height in RS is 2.5 stories. In CL, it allows, if this were a CL zone, it would allow 5 stories. We're proposing a 3-story building. So I think we're well within the range, but we would have to request a variance from the RS. Because we're zoned RS, we still need that half a story variance. I'm going to skip maximum building length for a minute and go down to the minimum front yard. RS requires 50 feet. The CL zone would require 0. And the dimension proposed by the applicant, we're showing 25 feet. One of the realities about the multifamily today is that the city prefers the parking behind the buildings rather than in front. You don't want stuff in the front yard. So in essence, we're trying to move the building as far front as we can. It's the plan that's up on the screen now. So all the activity would be facing the other way. And we'll get into the design of it in a little bit because we're going to have like two frontages on it. To go back to maximum building length, there's under the code in general, it says 80 feet maximum for a building.
180.
180, I'm sorry. This one is showing 186, I believe.
Correct.
But apart from that, the applicant, since they met with Darlene, came up with an idea to do a squared off building and or an L. And bear with me a minute, there's a method behind the madness. We feel that this is directly on a bus line. The bus stops right about here in this area. And we're talking to PennDOT about having a shelter there as well, so that people are protected in the weather. But the best thing would be is if the residents could come into the building here, into like an atrium kind of thing, where we would have their mailboxes, secured storage for if they had deliveries. And then from there, they could sort of be directed in either direction. If we did that, and what we were talking with Dominic and John about is perhaps cutting off this, angling it so it would have a better appearance. People coming up or headed westbound. And I'll let Dominic talk about that because we're also looking at having frontage here, obviously, for people to walk in. But we also want to have that appearance. The code requires that we have the appearance of frontage, and we would. It would be something somebody could use. But Dominic, if you want to talk to that, I'll hold this.
In response to the letter from the planning department, some of the concerns were, as is usual, we would like the building to have an appearance, that it has a frontal appearance facing Easton Avenue. And taking that into consideration, we felt we would be able to accomplish that better by having an entranceway connecting the two buildings, as Jim said. It serves as a purpose because we feel that because there is a bus stop right on the property, we feel that'll help help people that live here. Theoretically, you don't really you don't need a car to live here. You could basically come out of your apartment, take the bus to a park and ride, go to work, come back, and a drop shop right in front of the house, in front of the apartment building. We feel that to just, in contrary to have two separate buildings, to put one entrance here would only be serving one building. By putting the entrance, splitting the two, both buildings would be served by access.
And again, we feel that would be like a common area for things that all residents would have in common. Maybe delivery of packages. Mail delivery today comes to one central location.
Mr. Villani, the memo from the city dated February 3rd, obviously you just mentioned some of the design guidelines that they're requesting. Do you envision that structure to have a similar frontage facing Easton Avenue that would be facing the parking lot, as to make it appear, I'll say, not as plain, bland? Those types of design ideas came up in the past in this group. Is that something that you're willing to comply with, to conform and make it look and appear from Easton Avenue all in the same light?
And the other thing would be, obviously, if we were successful in getting relief from the zoning board, we would have to come back here with regard to lighting, traffic flow, ingress, egress, all the things. But I think overall, as a sketch, I think it's a pretty well thought out design. We knew in 2007 the neighbors did have concerns about traffic flow through, so we know from back then what has to be done, what kind of buffering they were looking.
Could you tell us a little bit, Mr. Villani, about the back portion, the buffering for the residents that are in the rear part of the site?
This is just a colored rendering that gives us a depiction. This side here, which is the eastern side of the property, is heavily shrub now. Obviously, because it's winter, it's not as dense, but it's still somewhat dense. We would be reinforcing and installing a buffer area with trees, a tree line buffer around the entire property. There's, if I may get the other picture, that's a real good picture. everybody can make this out. You can see faintly, there is a tree line here.
Right.
Where it is lacking is along the back where the houses are. The plan is designed to allow us the footage in the back to put a reinforced buffer to, protect the existing, the adjacent residents there, so they won't be impacted by this.
And again, this would have to come back to the planning.
Right.
commission.
Certainly, you touched on, and we're going to be meeting, our other agenda item tonight is examining our saldo. As you know, Mr. Holzinger, Mr. Vellani being here in the past, we've the climate action plan has become a very important part of our city's future moving forward. We are going to look to incorporate as many ideas along that. You touched upon obviously, and Mr. Malozzi, a big advocate of land to use in any project. You couldn't have a better opportunity because I'm going to ask him, he probably knows the number. Mr. Malozzi, what number bus line runs to the park and ride?
That would be the 101, Mr. Chairman.
I make my point, Counselor.
Part
So-
of the enhanced bus service route, the highest frequency that.
So from a walkability standpoint of the residents there, really their car, if they are traveling via a bus, it's they're not going that far, correct?
We feel that because of the bus stop there, also the close proximity to what's across the street, has a pet store, it has a grocery store, it has an ice cream place. So it has all the amenities and service oriented, okay? And what we would plan to implement, providing this goes forward, is bike racks here where people
Right.
can actually don't need a vehicle.
In terms of utilities, energy efficiency, all those provisions are being taken place, correct?
Absolutely. Electric charging stations, high efficiency heat pumps. I can let John speak on it all better than me regarding the type of units they are and who he believes they would attract. But we feel that because it's on the eastern fringe of the city, closer to 33, we feel very strong about the bus lane, as I mentioned before. And I just want to make a comment. We're not looking to negate, and the reason we're vague on the number of units at this point, because after the letter came out, we felt we may be able to accommodate and address some of those comments by implementing a different design. But we state here, we're not looking for any parking variances. We would probably, as Mr. Holzinger stated, we feel if the CL zone is applied, we feel we are not going to exceed that density of the CL zone, actually be substantially less, but we're not looking to infringe on any less parking. So we would adhere to the 1.75 parking spaces and work backwards, if you will, with this new design.
Yeah, we're sensitive to the idea that there's no on-street parking.
Right.
We have to be able
Right.
to accommodate it. And with respect to the bus lane, bus stop, I feel confident that we will get that type of tenant because now we're building something where everything's in place already and it is a highly traveled route.
So with that said, and again, if any members want to jump in, obviously another hot item that is always mentioned is affordable housing, right, and affordability, and certainly some of the projects that we are starting and underway and finished at the Armory and the Boyd Theater, the area of where those projects are being completed probably drive a higher monthly rate, correct? And not taking anything away from this project, but from a location standpoint, I would think that it would be a little bit more in that affordable range. And certainly that's going to help. The more that we can provide in terms of units, that will drive a project like this to an affordable. Am I correct in saying that? I don't know if you have any range that you would be considering, or your name, please, for the record.
John Tallarico, 274 Whitewood Road.
Thank you, Mr. Tallarico.
So, just my history has been apartment business since the 70s and rentals. And I always thought I was, I was always the most affordable, I thought. Because you see, nothing has changed. You see all the glitz now and all the steel and glass and all the views. So, listen, there's nothing wrong with that, but you still need affordable housing.
Right.
So I always felt that, people would say to me, well, John, you want to be in that business, all these new apartments. I'm like, well, what happens is a lot of people can't afford that. So they come to people like me to rent it. And I'm not going to charge them a premium on the rent for a view here. I mean, it's going to be a nice, beautiful building. And amenities are the bike, get right out, you can go right out on the sidewalk. There's a man station there, push the button, go across to the county and all those, everything that's involved in that shopping center across the street. So from my standpoint is, I think we're going to give them enough. We're not going to give them a great view, but we're going to give them a beautiful building, and it will be
Right, right.
And a safe neighborhood.
And Mr. Holzinger, did you say 2005, 2006? It's been
I believe it was in 2006 at the nursery.
So,
And we were in
for almost 16 years. It's been
It was an active, I mean, the nursery was, they had trees planted there, it was like a big greenhouse.
had three driveways.
Yeah, three driveways.
so this would obviously help our tax base then as well and get us back on the books, so to
By
speak.
being affordable doesn't mean we're gonna give on anything. We're gonna, we want to put the charging station.
Right.
For the electric cars.
Right.
Have an area for their packages and then, take advantage of all these technologies at the same time. We're not gonna be up there. Some crazy number.
Any other planning commission members? Obviously, Mr. Holzinger and Mr. Milani, Mr. Tallarico have chosen this way to go about it, which we really like, a site plan review first. It always helps to create that dialogue and give recommendations from us so that when you do return for final approval, it tends to be a lot smoother. So I'm going to turn it over to that's all the questions I have had for now, to any other planning commission members. Ms. Cohen.
Could you please show us the building view elevations?
Oh, yeah, Thank you.
Three-story walk-up, which is a pod development, pod building. So there would be two per building, there would be two entranceways. So the only people privy to that entranceway are the ones that live in that pod.
And this is your idea of what it would look like from the parking lot? Okay. My two concerns are from the street. You talked about a 50-foot setback in lieu of 25. The two
No,
property,
25 instead of 50, I
correct,
believe. I'm sorry.
closer to the street. The two properties to the east and the west immediately, I would prefer that the building match those properties and was not closer to the street than those two properties. And my other concern is that I would like the scale of the building architecturally. I know it's a larger building than the single-family residences that are next to it or surrounding it, that the scale of the building is such, made to appear smaller than what it is. And the possible, you see the,
So with this front line.
right, yep. Maybe
I'm not-
that's 35 feet or so, but
I'm not sure offhand.
But they seem to be all set back about the same distance. And I think because of the speed people are coming up and down that road, having something closer to the street than those buildings would make it seem bigger.
Okay. There is a light there,
Yes.
just not disturbed by the light. Okay.
Well, quite honestly, if I may, we were, or at least I was concerned about the perception with respect to the neighbors back here. That's why I thought, or when they suggested moving it up to 25, it actually was less imposing on properties to the rear.
I think you have enough space to set back from the back road, back that you can, if you could consider that, that's my concern.
Okay.
And my second concern was the scale of the two large buildings. The rendering that you have does cut down the scale somewhat, but be very sensitive that you're going between, I know the one on the west, I believe, is a 1-story. So going from a 1-story to a 3 is going to have a big impact. And if you could cut the scale down visually by setbacks or different materials that make it seem shorter.
You have the development. It is, driveway is on this side, so
Yeah.
there would be some distance to the.
Okay. Personally, I think having the two buildings would be preferable because then it doesn't seem like one enormous building
Squared off, you know.
compared to the single families next to it. Those are the things I would be interested in you considering. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Any other comments, questions?
I have a question. So
Mr. Burgos?
where exactly where your bus is at? Okay, now my concern would be, will be a road widening? Is there like after the bus, like to try to get in, because I'm considering with traffic behind, you know?
There is a signalized light here,
Okay,
so there's a traffic light there, so
Mm.
probably when the light is.
yeah, because I'm looking here, like if your bus is stopping here
Right.
and this lane, people are gonna have to go around the bus.
We reached out to a representative from Atlanta, we're waiting for a call back.
Okay.
And what we plan to do is talk to them, her, about where would be the ideal spot. Please acknowledge we also need a PennDOT occupancy permit for driveway. And also, there's gonna probably be some re-signalization of the lights,
Mhm.
and all the crosswalks. So that is something that we can take into account.
Okay.
When we do.
Okay.
Design.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking about with traffic running pretty heavy down there. Okay, thank you.
If you did join the two buildings, would it add more units potentially?
It would, because there would be wasted space combining them, but again, we would still comply with the 1.75 parking spaces per.
And still provide the bike storage,
Right.
mail,
Right.
package drop off there.
Right. And I assume like package deliveries, obviously everything would be from behind the buildings. So those would be right there in the corner. So I realize there was actually just an article in the Lehigh Valley Business about how residential design was changing because so many people are working from home, everything from deliveries to office space inside your units and those types of things. So that's an appealing thought to have sort of a common space, I think, where those kind of amenities can be added. And if there is going to be a direct access to a bus shelter of some kind, and there's bikes there too, sort of your multimodal kind of piece of the development going on right in that spot there.
And I'm actually hoping, like, if Amazon's doing deliveries, they can do one stop, to load everything. I live in a multifamily development where everybody has their own mailbox, and you might have 3 different Amazon trucks, or you may have 4 different UPS trucks. So something like this, I think they would try to forward.
That said, not having the building seem like a block, because then there wouldn't be any visual through there. Maybe there are some treatments that get to what Ms. Cohen's comments were, if it was more transparent, if it was kind of glass, a lot of glass there or something where there was more visual, that might address some of that
That's why we
concern
use
too.
our nature a little earlier,
It-
some black and some
This is just a preliminary concept, providing this addresses. And, that would address.
Certainly, I see Ms. Cohen's point, but I would agree with Mr. Malozzi in the light that if we could incorporate something that might allow a little bit more flow of light, what have you. But I think it's important to not only will it provide that space for mail, other amenities that you're going to provide in a common meeting area, what have you, but I think it also would really somehow set it off from Easton Avenue as you're coming up, kind of like whether it's signage or what have you, that's what is there, right? Not just two buildings. I think a central focal point, if you will, that would provide cars traveling to say, hey, look there, it just sets it off a little bit more. That would be my feedback.
Just a couple other notes because it was a 5-page city letter with a lot of really good comments, and that's why you're here. I echo the chairman's comment. This is great that when people come in with a site plan review like this, so that we have this opportunity. I'm a big fan of density where it's appropriate. I think that's a huge needle mover as far as climate action and land, proper land usage and value, particularly in a city setting, even though this is on the edge of the city here. But, absent any serious concerns about the neighbors and that the buffering is, as you say, it'd be pretty aggressive buffering. So their views would be controlled. And then, taking into account comments to anything to make those buildings look less taller, the 3 stories than anything else. But some of the other with the density here, I'm familiar with this area, and if you look at it from the top, what you have here, this is kind of mixed use. I mean, if there wasn't an arterial running through there, you've got residential, you've got a pretty well-developed commercial center all up and down Easton Avenue there, access to grocery stores and all kinds of other core, retail that you need, pharmacy, dry cleaner, all those kind of things close to your home. The fact that all that infrastructure is present, everything's already there in terms of going for a more dense use, because I would imagine you couldn't put more than maybe 4 or so houses on this if you went with RS, just looking at the neighbors. And here you could put potentially 54 or thereabouts residences. So you've got all your infrastructure present. You're right on an arterial. You're lining up adjacent to a signalized intersection and potentially dropping 2 access points, which is a big home run with PennDOT too. You're closing off access points and channelizing everyone into the high occupancy driveway that exists there, right? That's probably pretty valid. The adjacent uses, I think would be complementary to this because they're commercial. And then I know everybody's probably got their copy, but I'll just read from my copy of the climate action plan, the land use and green space portion of it. One of the key items there is to optimize space used for buildings and opportunities for short daily trips. This is right to the heart of this. As I was looking at this, I was thinking about it. The introduction in that section, and please indulge me because we were asked to be very serious about bringing these up in development.
Absolutely.
Is the use and distribution of Bethlehem's land affect all greenhouse gases emitted by the city. Energy consumption in buildings depends on the density and distribution of those buildings. For example, multifamily housing typically requires less energy per square foot in a household member than single-family detached homes. The distribution of buildings also determines commuting distances, public transit accessibility, and the feasibility of substituting walking and biking for car trips. The first objective of the strategies outlined in this section are to shape the built environment to optimize space used for buildings and maximize opportunities for short daily trips and travel mode options. So we talked about the 101. I couldn't help myself. But that route right in that area, I mean, besides the Giant and the Aldi, which are walkable because there are pedestrian facilities already across the street, Valley Farm Market is a short distance down the road. And then there's a Weiss further down Stefco or Easton Avenue as well, too. The schools that are served along that corridor are Lincoln Elementary, Freedom High School, Notre Dame High School, Easton High School, and Wilson High School, all along that bus route there, as well as Paxenosa Elementary School Easton Hospital is served by that bus route, just to the east there. There are transfers to 13 Lanta routes in New Jersey Transit along that corridor as well, too. And the enhanced bus service, as I talked about, runs to the west of the Bethlehem Transportation Center at Broad and Getter, that has express stops all the way through there. So when you look at that corridor, this is where density belongs in my mind for all those reasons: the utilities, the transportation, the multimodal, the support, being able to walk to the grocery store and all those types of uses. So the comments that I was prepared to give tonight and forward to the zoning hearing board for their consideration is, I think this is exactly the type of area where a mixed use makes a lot of sense, as long as we can accomplish the buffering and the scale and not be detrimental to the residents who are east and west and north of this. But you're right alongside there, and you've actually got a bus stop, which is just a sign in the grass right now on your property. So when you start talking about a real shelter, a structured facility right there, and besides shopping, this is a job generator too, all this retail commercial. So I would assume, as you are, that you may have some people that work and definitely shop in that area. And 54 units, I don't think is being too aggressive in terms of the density there. So
When we did the hearing before and made a presentation, we talked about what a planned residential development looks like when you have, even when this was a small retail center, that people would have access to it. We even had an aerial of a similar PRD that was designed. Same sort of thing here. A PRD would have around near single family. So the difference in uses isn't something you don't see. It's something that encouraged.
And again, part of our job this evening is with a site plan review. I think we've had some real good dialogue. Mr. Burgos, Ms. Cohen, Mr. Malozzi all gave great input on when you do come back for final approval. But tonight we will be passing along our recommendation, Ms. Heller, to zoning for the variances. And when that time comes, we'll put that in the form of a motion. But I'm going to continue. If there's any other questions or comments by any planning commission members at this time, Mr. Malozzi couldn't put it any better. And again, you can detect his passion that he has for public transportation in Atlanta, and to me, it is a smart. It's smart density in the best location possible. So I would agree with him on that. Any other questions, comments?
If I may,
Mr. Holzinger.
we do make a recommendation. I was hoping you could give some flexibility to the building length to allow for the possibility of, not that it would happen, but also with respect to the 54 units, that it could go up to a little higher. If we do that design where we do it. Again, we have to come back here. We're not asking that, you're approving it, just saying to the zoning board that they not limit it.
Right.
and your
Maybe
comment
couch
was
it in a way that leave it to the discretion of the planning commission.
you would have to stay under, unless you were going to ask for relief on parking, you would have to stay under the maximum
Correct.
calculation. there.
Absolutely.
So
We just, we haven't really, I don't know how many spaces are on here.
There's an excess of 100 spaces on this according to this design. Again, not to repeat myself, but just in addressing the letter that was written, that's why we're being a little vague on it, because we felt that we talked to a guy with some design planning and said one of the ways to enhance the building was having a common entrance this way. They can come out to the bus stop and also come out onto the sidewalk. But again, it's preliminary at this point, so what we're stipulating is we're not seeking any variances for parking. Right, so we're going to adhere to the 1.75. I had a prior meeting with the lady, and she greatly so indicated this is more like an island, so it's not like we have the luxury of being on the corner property and parking. So we understand 100% of it, but we have to live with the parking that we have. That's all the same time to work backwards. That's why Mr. Holzinger said we
Mr. Holzinger, in reference to the remaining part of the February 3rd memo, the additional comments made by our city staff, certainly you're willing to comply with the preliminary comments made for engineering and the fire, public works, traffic, what have you, that all.
We understand that may cause a small change in the site plan
Right.
to accommodate some of those concerns, but at this point, we think they would be.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? I think, gentlemen, you could have a seat and stand in a long time here. Ms. Heller, anything else from the February 3rd memo that needs to be addressed from the city?
I'll just clarify that from our point of view, we felt that because of many of the reasons that you have already discussed, that some relief on the use was appropriate because, the arterial street, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the question before the zoning hearing board is then how much density really is appropriate for relief. And I think, we didn't really weigh in on that. But if they do approve that, you have already talked about some of our comments having a front face to Easton Avenue. The buffering, certainly we need to consider the abutting neighbors if the project moves forward. The lighting, climate action plan. And then one thing that's not technically in the letter, but that we do bring up, and you did this, Mr. Malosky, is the affordable housing units. Oftentimes for land developments now, we're requesting that developers look at a 10% of affordable units, and that would be 80% or below the median income range for our region. So we can talk about that as the project moves forward, but those are the comments that we've had in our letter.
Good. Anyone here in attendance tonight have any comments pertaining to the site plan review at 2897 Easton Avenue? So I don't want to sound repetitive or redundant, but we appreciate you coming in. This always ends up being a lot smoother when a site plan review is in front of us. I would open up now, and I'm going to defer to council here. Individually, recommendations on each zoning variance.
Yeah, can I just?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On individual.
I didn't know you were looking at
Really have a big impact.
21.
Even if they keep it at one.
I prefer it's.
Well, and again, they didn't really have.
This whole section
E.
lists out, if you look at these,
25.
all the requirements, if you're going to do
No, this is.
daycare,
25 is what they
if you're
say.
going to do a drive-through facility, whatever, that's what,
I'm saying with you.
that's what those
Probably, yeah.
requirements are for.
That these residents are.
Um,
Well, I mean, when we hit that point of the.
Just gonna.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking down in the township, I know there's some stuff right
Something
up
is
against it,
permitted,
which,
is,
Is like
Yeah,
that.
down by the
shall be
post
submitted-
office, they're right up.
yeah, but they're like 10 feet off.
Okay, another section says planning commission review of a special exception or variance for a new principal or
Okay, so that's-
non-resident.
I do, yeah.
So B, number 2, it applies.
I'm sort of a.
Some noise. I would. And it's flat, eh? It's great.
That's fine with me.
Council,
Yes. The question is whether what we're going to do individual.
I believe in the past, Ms. Heller, I think we've always kind of tried to do each request separate.
I don't know that you have, although maybe you want to weigh in. I think generally, you may have weighed in on the letter. Like, do you
Right.
support what's in here, or do you want to supplement these comments?
I
with any
understand.
Other comments? You can do it how you want, I think, but I mean, generally it's been,
Look, I think, I mean, I guess the minutes can reflect
Yes.
if people have various comments that might differ from the approved motion by the commission.
Right.
See, I'm relatively new at this. I think it's more though appropriate that when the commission adopts a motion that recommends with conditions or recommends disapproval, I think that should be a unified posture.
Understood. So with that said, and I hope Mr. Deschler's explanation, I look at Mr. Malozzi, made sense, but obviously the applicant here is seeking our recommendation to the zoning hearing board. So I would entertain a motion as it stands and presented with the memo February
Unified
3rd.
motion, right? Okay. Well,
And keep in mind what council said, if we need to add any recommendations to certain particular parts of that, we can do that in that motion.
Right. I think the commission is able to make a recommendation that is different from those proposed in Ms. Heller's letter. I just think that that recommendation should be the recommendation of the commission, and if individual members have things that they'd like to point out that may not command majority support, they can do so, but that would not be the recommendation of the commission.
Right, but it's on the record and they have the transcript and that was mentioned. Understood.
I'll take a crack at it. I'll make a motion that the planning commission forward the city's letter of February 3rd, 2022, with its comments regarding 2897 Easton Avenue site plan review with a favorable recommendation for the project and the requested relief, with the items of concern noted in the record.
And does any planning commission member have any other items they just want to make sure were noted again for Ms. Rosario as she's keeping the minutes? Ms. Cohen,
The client request, or the applicant requested that the consideration be for up to 60 units on the lot.
was that a definite? I know there was some,
If I
it
may,
wasn't very clear whether it was going to be 54 or 60. Is that
we had modified the request to be up to 60, but
Up
not
to
necessarily
60.
60. And then the other one was the building length, even if we didn't connect it, but I'd like to have some consideration, because if we come up with a design, it doesn't mean it gets approved, it just means it comes back here without a zoning
Right.
issue.
right?
The building length
Doesn't
is
get
already
approved.
in the letter from the city.
Right.
My one other concern was the setback to match the adjacent properties.
Well, if I may, I'm looking at the plan up on the screen right now. It doesn't look like that's a significant difference. I don't know, and John, if you know offhand, what's the difference between the distance between the building in the front and the parking? Because there may be some
Another
way
one,
to have
just like
relief
this
there
one.
that
Yeah,
would
so
allow us
The
to
old
move
one
it
was
back.
30. This was what Kevin said. Farther back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. Same plan is up there. And this house, as you're coming up on the project, this is pretty heavily vegetated in this area. And we're gonna buffer it some more, but right now it's a jungle.
I don't necessarily need a discussion or explanation. I just would like my comment to be included in the
Yeah.
minutes. Thank you.
Right.
So it's in the minutes, but as far as the motion, multiple commissioners,
Right. The motion is on the floor, made by Mr. Malozzi, in support of the February 3rd memo put together by the city. Mr. Holzinger, representing the applicant, pointed out that the number of units will not exceed 60. It may be less than, and also pointed out the clarification on the building length. Correct. It is noted in our minutes of Ms. Cohen's concerns with the setback. So we do have a motion. I will second Mr. Malozzi's motion. Any other discussion on that? Roll, please.
Mr. Malozzi,
Yes.
Mr. Burgos,
Yes.
Ms. Cohen,
Yes.
Mr. Malowski.
Yes. Gentlemen, again, thank you for taking the time out of your day and taking this approach. It's always been something we find a lot easier for everyone involved, and best of luck moving forward. We look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Hey, thank you.
Support the project with conditions of one, they meet the conditions of this letter. They not exceed 60 units, and they have some flexibility on building. I mean, that's how I would summarize. We can do it.
I heard the concerns about the setback as well.
Yeah, but they didn't add that to the
But
motion.
that's, I
But
mean,
it's in the,
well, okay, but if, look, if,
it's in the
well,
contract.
but if we,
Even
if,
if it's not in the motion.
but look, I mean, if we adopt a motion that says,
Oh, yes, I think
we're,
For the discussion.
we're recommending what's in the letter plus the concerns noted, that sounds like a motion that's been
Okay.
adopted by the
Okay.
whole commission.
Okay.
Is that what was
Yes.
intended?
Yes.
Okay. Like, I mean, do we have a majority of the commission that also agrees that there's some concerns about the setback of the building? Is that what was understood?
I'm going to be honest with you. I was okay with it. I see Ms. Cohen's point, but I don't know how clear it was in terms of a definitive amount. I heard 25, but then I heard it maybe 35 in terms of the setback. So, and even if it was only 25, I was okay with that. Ms. Cohen, I think, might have been the only one who wanted to see. I don't want to speak for the other members.
Okay. Like, yeah, what I would suggest, kind of maybe going forward, like I think obviously everyone should voice their opinions on the project, the site plan before us. But I think when this again, I'm coming at this is my second meeting, but I kind of believe that when the commission makes a recommendation, it is the position of the commission. Now it may not be unanimous, but right, it's the majority position of the commission. So if there, or for example, if the majority does not agree with Ms. Cohen that the setback issue is a concern, if we're okay with it being right against the street, I would just, I think the commission members should be clear about that. So I think the way the motion was adopted does express a concern with the setback. Was that the feeling of the other three?
My feeling was that the motion was made and my two comments would be noted following the motion and before the vote was made. So my two comments were included, but not necessarily final and agreed upon by the vote.
That's why, and Ms. Cohen's correct. That has come up that way in the past. That's why initially, Counselor, I asked, do we do these separate, right? Because sometimes when there was 5 here, right? Sometimes when there's a lot, we like spin our wheels, and then
I got it.
a lot of times in the past, we would say, well, let's just split them up one by one. So again, I don't want to speak for Mr. Burgos or Mr. Malozzi. I was following Mr. Malozzi's motion, which was, as the February 3rd memo is written by the city, we are supporting it, moving it forward to the zoning hearing board. And then that's when Ms. Cohen had mentioned the setback concern. And I did highlight, which is in there, about the number of units and the building length. because that was a little bit of a unclear.
Okay.
I don't want to say this, but I think sometimes we split atoms up here when it comes to this stuff.
I understand.
Well, for this part, we're recommending at this point. I don't, the zoning hearing board could, take it under advisement or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
So just a general, I made the motion with a sense that there was broad and unanimous support for the project itself.
Mhm.
And since we weren't going item by item, I didn't speak to any of them in the motion specifically, but we had a lot of commentary here, which I assume, and then specifically, Ms. Cohen noted the other two issues along with the motion. So hopefully in the minutes, those are very visible to the zoning hearing board.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to get a flavor of how we're doing things. Okay.
Because this has the whole project, if it gets some or all of these variances, it still has to be fully engineered and designed. So there's a long way to go to address specifics.
And in the past, Matt, we've sent things on to the zoning hearing board. We've sent things on the city council in the past, in my 10, 11 years I've been here, that we have recommended for approval, and ultimately they say no. Anyway, so that's part of the process, as you know, and the transcript that they get is, as clear as can be in terms of what feedback we give them. So.
Okay. I guess. Yep. Maybe the way when we're proposing recommendations, it's just a thought. I mean, if it's kind of like the lowest common denominator that commands majority support, like that ought to be the recommendation. And obviously, right, the minutes can reflect the individual views of commission members, which still may be given weight by the zoning hearing board, right?
Right.
I just, it's something to maybe to think about.
That's pretty much what we did, right? What you're describing is it was a broad, non-specific support for the project with a lot of comments that are in the minutes for the zoning hearing board to review.
Correct, but I guess one of my thoughts was I wasn't sure if the concerns about the building being set back versus against the street were really the concerns of a majority. That was kind of what brought maybe this now too extended conversation, to a head.
And again, my history with it then goes back to my initial question. Really, the only way you were going to get a consensus on the setback was we pull that one out and make that separate. And in the form of a motion, whether it was Ms. Cohen or who have you, then we vote on just that. I really think that's the only way you're going to get a.
Actually, though, the setback didn't need any zoning relief. That's really a design request that Ms. Cohen made to help with its compatibility with the neighborhood, I think. But it's not a variance that they need.
It was a variance.
The setback?
Dimensional variance. Yeah.
I don't.
Well,
think-
no. It wasn't a variance. It was an example
Oh, I see.
on the
E.
relief.
You're right.
E.
E.
Oh, you're right.
In
it
my
is.
letter.
You're right.
E.
You're right.
You're right. So they do require relief on the setback. So that was
Sorry,
not
I
one that you
apologize.
supported. Yeah, okay.
From my perspective, I think just the fact that all of our comments throughout the whole topic, including Matt's and Eddie's and Rob's, are included in the minutes, that the zoning hearing board gets the whole
Correct.
discussion
Mhm.
of various items.
Right. Yeah. I'm not disputing any of that. I mean, obviously that's correct. I was just thinking again. I was sort of approaching it where when the commission makes a recommendation, we can kind of pinpoint what precisely is being recommended. If it's the letter plus A, B, and C add-ons, things, and that would command a majority of support of the commission, as opposed to just sort of sending the minutes on that reflect the individualized opinions of the members. That's all.
Sure.
I am going to request a 5-minute. I drank that bottle of water and my kidneys are screaming. And then we will return here for 6:15, 6:17 to start the saldo discussion. Ms. Samuelson, are we fine?
You can always fact check me.
It's on? Okay.
Check that.
Sorry, the nature called, so to speak. So
TMI.
we are moving on to our next agenda item, one that is an annual discussion of our saldo and updating some things. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Darlene Heller for our saldo discussion. Darlene?
If you want to come up here, Tracy, you could spread out a little bit too, but because there's nothing up there. Okay, so we just did a very brief memo on this. Tracy's really been leading the update of the saldo for the last at least few years. She has met with each of the other departments that review plans. She's met with the Law Bureau and others. And we've gotten to a point where we think we have a pretty good final draft. And because the Climate Action Plan was permitted or approved last year, we went back to really re-review the ordinance and make sure that the goals and objectives of the Climate Action Plan are reflected in here. So we've talked about this generally before. You each have a copy. And I thought that honestly, what we could just do today is go through the book and point out what some of the changes are.
I think that's the best way to approach
Okay.
it, Ms. Heller.
And not that we're going to do this page by page, but if you can just go to pages 2 and 3 in the table of contents, I would just note that the initial chapters of this ordinance really are pretty straightforward. I think that the section that you're probably most interested in is 1349 because those are the design sections. But there are some changes to the initial chapters. Mostly our current saldo is from 1971. So we are really bringing this into the new century, frankly. We made it reflective of the requirements of the MPC. In the second chapter, we added some definitions so that the definitions in this ordinance are compatible with the definitions in the zoning ordinance and other ordinances. The procedures that we use right now are not specifically what's in the ordinance. The current ordinance is not very clear. And so in Article 1343, Tracy went through and really created a chapter that reflects the actual review process that we use. One of the things that's new in there is that for lot consolidations, we're going to streamline that practice. You can just create a deed description for a lot consolidation. We're just trying to find ways to make the process as efficient as possible without sacrificing quality development and things like that. So then in chapters 1344, 45, and 46, we get into the very specific requirements of a sketch plan, a major subdivision, or a minor subdivision. At this point, you don't review minor subdivisions or minor land developments. We have some of those as well. And then Article 1347, improvements guarantee. When a project moves forward, we prepare a developer's agreement, and there's some protections for the city as developers are obviously working in our right of way and developing projects. And so 1347 addresses some things along those lines. And we are, again, bringing it into compliance with what we're permitted to do in the MPC. And I should watch what I say. I say the term MPC because we use that all the time, but the MPC is Pennsylvania's Municipalities Planning Code. It's the state legislation that allows us to review development. It requires that we have a comprehensive plan, which we do. It was adopted by the city in 2008. And that's the city's long-range plan for development. And the municipality's planning code then also includes some tools for the city to be able to implement the goals and objectives that are outlined in the comp plan. So one of those is a zoning ordinance. Another is the subdivision and land development ordinance, which we're talking about here. There are some other things, transportation infrastructure and some other tools that are included in there. But the main tools that we use really are the zoning ordinance and the SALDO. We get into recording the plans. Once something is adopted, it does need to be recorded. And then they need to build the development, as it's been approved and recorded. And then in 1349, we get into the design standards. And then I thought I would just kind of go through, I think you each have an ordinance. Just to pick some things out that are new in the ordinance. So on page 29, we have a chapter on sketch plans, and we specifically include a section that talks about recommending a pre-plan consultation. We try to do that, even if it's not a formal sketch plan, like you saw a site plan today with the Easton Avenue project. But even if it's not a formal sketch plan review like you just had on this agenda, we do try to have developers come in and see us, and let's talk through what this development is and how does it mirror the goals and objectives of some of our neighborhood plans and our ordinances and things like that. So the earlier, and you all know this, the earlier we can talk with a property owner or a developer or an applicant, the more flexible they can be with the project and the project's design and layout, et cetera.
Really?
Yes.
Is there, I recall some discussion on sketch plan versus site plan having some weight to it with regard to the MPC? Like if we acted on a site plan that it could be deemed approved, or I assume we're watching that. Like sketch plan is something different than a site plan in the eyes of the law, right?
I think as far as the amount of detail on the plans, they are pretty much the same. But you're right, a sketch plan, you don't really act on a sketch plan. It's here for us to give feedback to a developer. The site plan is a little bit more specific because that's in the zoning ordinance. And if someone is applying to the zoning hearing board for relief for any kind of a land development, it comes here to you first as a site plan review. That's what we call a site plan review. So this project on Easton Avenue is a multi-unit, multi-family development. That's definitely a land development. So it comes to you first so that you can create some comments if you want, and that's reviewed as a site plan.
So a sketch plan is not seeking any kind of variances from zoning.
Generally, I mean, yeah, it could, it's true. But
So I guess what, in the time with what Mr. Malozzi is saying here, this is just me. I like when we see whether it's a sketch or a site plan first and foremost, because I think everyone would agree it does help.
Mhm.
So I know it does say in here, and it might just be just for sketch plans, but I would like to see it not recommended. I would like to see it required.
Well, I'll tell you what, though, a sketch plan, the municipality's planning code doesn't allow us to require a sketch plan.
No, I'm sorry, site plan review. Do they,
It is required if a
they're
project
asking for,
zoning relief.
what if they're not?
There's a couple of things though under
I
that
still
site
think
plan
we
section.
should maybe help the process.
Well, it always is, I believe, in the developer's interest to do that, but I don't know that we can require it. I just don't know that. And we can make that a note to check that, but
I I don't know how anyone else feels on that. And that's why I asked the difference between a sketch plan and a site plan review. But it often, even if they're asking for relief, something from zoning, boy, it just seems to go a lot. People have a chance to give some feedback, and the developer
I
or whoever's
understand.
doing the project
Mhm.
changes and listens. So
And it gives the public an early
Exactly.
shot. This is supposed to
Sure.
be a collaborative.
sure,
This is where
I
that
think
happens.
that to me that makes sense. And then somehow, and I wrote this down, Darlene, and Tracy might. Well, you both, I'm sure, know it. The other thing that I hear a lot of is the time of when an applicant applies, puts their paperwork in. What is that timeline until they're here, they get approval, they can get a shovel in the ground, permits are pulled? Is that timeline set in stone? Is that a 30-day or
No.
what is it?
It really, I often say to people, it really depends on the quality of the development submission, the plan submission. There are time limits in the municipalities planning code and other things about how long we have to review a plan. Typically, I think you have always wanted to see a plan that's pretty clean, where there aren't a lot of conditions still remaining.
Right.
So usually that takes 2 reviews. Usually they submit a plan. We collect all the comments. The comments are forwarded to the applicant, and they clean up the plan basically and then resubmit it. And then that second plan is usually the one that you see. That's usually the process. And then
the second one is when the time clock starts.
no, it starts the day that they submit.
Well, actually,
And what is that clock?
okay, let me just tell you, because what we do when we typically take in a plan, I mean, we always do this, when it's a land development or a major subdivision that you would see. The day doesn't begin when it's brought in. The day that there's a 90-day clock that you have to act on a plan within 90 days unless you get extensions. And we always get extensions from people because they're the ones slowing it down. For some reason, they're not ready to resubmit a second time. Okay. So when a plan is submitted, let's say it's submitted April 1st, or let's say April 15th, the day one for that plan does not begin until 30 days from that date it comes in, or the next planning commission, if the next planning commission meeting date is like over 30 days, I think, or something like that. So basically it's 120 days, from the date you get it. You don't start ticking off the 90-day review period until at least a planning commission meeting has occurred.
Is that
okay?
90-day review period etched in stone by the state
Yes.
or by us?
No, it's a state. I always have to go back to that section in the MPC to remember how to compute the deadline day. Okay.
All
And we keep it on a chart. You get that chart every month.
Council.
All applications for approval of plat, whether preliminary or final, shall be acted upon by the governing body or the planning agency within such time limits as may be fixed in the saldo. But the governing body or the planning agency shall render its decisions and communicate it to the applicant not later than 90 days following the date of the regular meeting of the governing body or the planning agency, whichever first reviews the application, next following the date the application is filed, or after a final order of the court remanding an application, provided that should the said next regular meeting occur more than 30 days following the filing of the application or the final order of the court, the said 90-day period shall be measured from the 30th day following the application has been filed.
Understood.
Wonderful clarity.
Understood. Understood.
It's basically 120 days.
Yeah. So that answers that question. But now it goes back to what Ms. Heller said, and I see the need to have possibly 2 submissions. First one, you guys get to clean that up. That's your job. You guys are right. We're here. You do your work. But certainly, and if I'm wrong, tell me so. Don't you feel that a site plan review would help that more so collaboratively, so everyone's aware and could give input?
I would agree, except that I made a note, we need to check to see whether we can require that
Got it.
or if it's voluntary.
Understood.
And so we'll have to pull that. I think your counsel here is already trying to read the MPC on
Second.
his phone, but
Should have brought my big book.
yeah. So we will
Understood.
check that and let you
Understood.
know. And,
So-
and if we can require it, I think it's reasonable to put in there. I just don't think we can require it. So
So, but you could say, you could be creating your own problem in that. Do you know how many plans come through here? If you make every one, that means your agendas are going to be twice as long. Do you want them to be twice as long?
Be more than twice, and you will be looking at something that it's not clean for you to review at all. And trust me, sometimes we get some site plan review that the first time we look at, we don't want to look. And they go back for review. And one of the discussion was that sometimes we need force people to do proper submission of clean plan, so it's not
Understood.
looking at those
Right.
plans.
It makes sense to me hearing this. It
I
makes
think
sense.
you're talking about though an overall look. Like tonight, it was very general.
Yeah.
Could we look at that? That's the
Yeah.
kind of thing. But then you have to look. That took an hour.
Right.
So it depends how much you want on your, how much you want on your agendas too.
I
You
just-
have a
I
staff
gotta-
here.
I gotta say, I mean, the MPC makes a lot of references to preliminary and final plans.
Mhm.
I don't detect references to sketch plans in the MPC.
there is, I think there is a reference.
I think there is,
in
too.
the option.
We can move on.
Okay.
It answered my
Look it- we
question.
can look
Move
it up.
on.
And let me just say
Go
this, I'm
Dismount.
going to go through this just to point out some things that we've revised.
Mhm.
If you've gone through this, if you have questions as we go, or if there's things that you want to call out at any point, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to just go up to page 33. One of the things that we added is that, just as Basil noted, a lot of times we get plans that are really not well done. And that is very time consuming for us. It's challenging. Sometimes, frankly, it wastes our time. So we added in here a completeness review, which Tracy often does, but we're kind of clarifying that if it's not complete, we have some time to review it. And if it's not complete, we're sending that back, and it's not really a submission. We're just not going to accept it as a submission. And we really need to, it's very, very busy. We need to really be more efficient with the time that we spend. And so a completeness review is going to be important to us. On the next page, page 34, I just want to note that in our processes here, we're calling out that an applicant needs to send plans to LANTA
And the EAC.
and to the EAC. Now, we've been doing that, but it's really not
In-
laid out in the
right,
ordinance.
right.
So we're going to say that's
It will
that's part
now,
of the process. Yes.
Yes.
I
think we're all in favor of
I'm going to go up to page,
Don't make me filibuster.
that. Right.
I'm going to go up to page 41.
41.
And this is the section that was inserted to talk about lot mergers. 134605. If you're consolidating lots, we don't need to spend a lot of time looking at that. We don't have to route it to a lot of people. There's nothing that impacts your neighbors if you're doing that. So that we're going to do by deed in the future. We're going to try to make that as simple as possible. I'm going to go next to, then on page 50, that's where we start with Article 1349. And this is the chapter that outlines everything that we look at on the plans. This is what we're going to require on the plans. And so even on that page, there's a section about steep slopes. And that's one of the things, I'll just use that as an example. One of the things that we added, we have a steep slope section in the zoning ordinance that's very specific. This is just to say that they need to comply with those other provisions. We're trying to we don't need to duplicate requirements, but we want to make sure that there's some compatibility between ordinances. The next one that I am looking at, I think, is page 53. At the bottom, section E, we added a section on access management. And I say we, really, I have not been that involved in this at all. Tracy has done all the
Our
heavy lifting
team,
on this
yeah.
in conjunction with the Public Works Department and the Engineering Bureau. So,
And our consultant at the beginning. Mhm.
yeah, we worked with URDC for a couple of years too to try to get this organized, because it's really drawing up a new ordinance. We didn't go in and cut and paste things from the old one. This is just a new ordinance. So the access management section is new. It's really to try to streamline the number of cuts that you have on a property. We don't have provisions like this in our ordinance now. It's just an example of the fact that we need to look at it. We can't require some of the things now. People just comply basically because I think what we're requiring are really pretty practical things, but we're outlining some of those things in the ordinance. If you flip over to page 55, at the very bottom of the page, number 9, we have tried to look for situations in the ordinance where we can require that people really minimize the amount of impervious coverage that they're putting on a lot. Sometimes we see there's too much parking. The aisles are wider than they need to be. The turnaround area is wider than it needs to be, or it's already a surface parking lot and they're just not willing to tear it up and put green space in when they redevelop a lot. We're trying to require that people have to really strip that back. And we do have opportunities in here also for pervious surfaces. They do have to be reviewed and approved by the Engineering Bureau, but we want to be a little bit more flexible about pervious materials.
You know, I know that's an issue. One of the most active sectors, as we know, is healthcare in the area. And I know their internal request for parking typically exceeds almost every municipal ordinance, except Hanover Township, which is 7 per 1,000. It's just like huge, talk about asphalt. But that's a tough one because they'll every time they're very adamant, both of the major networks, that they've got to have this. So I don't know if it's any crediting or something, like, you know, like how do you address that then?
Yeah, it's funny you mention that. What is it, Eaton Avenue, where Bethlehem Eye Associates and Emma St. Luke's, there's no park. Drive over there tomorrow at 10 o'clock. They will be on the road on, what? 8. Eaton.
Yeah,
Eaton.
Eaton Wine.
Because of the parking lot for Bethlehem Eye Associates and the St. Luke's and I think it's a Good Shepherd in there as well.
Down at where
The triangle.
Shanersville comes
Yeah,
in.
by
and-
the,
Oh, yeah.
by the Yardways.
exactly.
Moravian building and Pathgood.
That's a
Shepherd.
perfect example of,
Not
you know,
enough.
I
How
don't-
about like with Martin
You know,
Tower?
Yeah.
Every application.
St. Luke's dialysis there.
Yes.
At 8th Avenue.
yes.
Before Martin Tower was taken
Yes.
down, the staffing used to park on Martin Tower and across the street.
Right.
They got the allowance, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it really depends on the type of medical use. Some medical office have a greater turnover of patients and things like that. So yeah, some are just a higher turnover and have more seats or.
I mean, I would agree with Matt on that one. There's a fine line there, and I think, you know, we should be able to grant some wiggle room in terms of, you know, what.
Or somebody like the ITE needs to do a better job so that there's something we can point to and say, like, no, actually medical office for these uses really only requires this, because right now it's, but there, you know, it's, I hate to single out like one type of land use, but it's so prevalent and it's one of these two massive networks and we're just going to see them over and over again.
But I guess what we're saying two different things. On the one hand, these uses all along Eaton Avenue are filled. Their lots are filled and they need more parking.
Right.
Yeah.
And then but yet I think what you're saying is maybe we're allowing, they always say they need so much and then maybe they're not filled. Are you saying that too? Because that's a second side, you know, of needing maybe a maximum parking, you know, how we tried, that would be a good thing in the zoning ordinance. This is the maximum parking you can have, you know. can't have 40 extra spaces or something.
I guess I'm kind of sympathetic for the use
Mhm.
because it's very much a community service kind of use.
Mhm.
At the same time, sensitive to wanting to reduce impervious surface. That's a balance that we're going to constantly have with that specific use.
Well, maybe, when we talked about, you were talking about this, about pervious pavement, maybe we have to look a little more closely at what point, if you say, oh, you need that, but then it's got to be pervious pavement, so you're being more environmentally sensitive.
Is that effective, pervious pavement?
Yeah, it's expensive, I know, but, well, go ahead. What happens with it?
It's never properly maintained.
Right, it'd have to be swept because once
Does it,
once sand and
Get
stuff gets in
salt
it, it's impervious.
Vacuum.
Yeah.
If I can add, I'm at the one job site where we're at now, the development, it goes so much into that, different type of stone. And then you have to do dams in between certain feet and it's,
Oh, you're creating that
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah,
a
it's
It's not
developer.
just
Yeah.
the top
and then
layer.
we're doing that. Yeah, you have different layers. Then you have to add like an inch of stone. So then they can do the concrete and it's a special mix and all that. And it's, I don't
It's
I don't
good
like
for us to know because it's
I mean,
going to come up every
especially
time.
now with
Oh,
the
yeah.
winter, who knows with the salt that you throw down, that's going to crack eventually.
Yeah,
It's not that thick either. So
More construction costs, more
Yep.
maintenance costs, if it's going to be done right.
yeah.
Well, maybe that's something to look into, is where is the best place for like a maximum parking, maximum spaces, I forget what the term is, but where you're
Yeah.
talking about a parking, you have certain developers of certain areas, and they're like, my standard is, I've got to have this much spaces,
Yeah.
and it's way over what you need. So because elderly come to the place and they have to see a parking space, there's a lot of things like that, especially in the medical
Right.
line.
We've all heard sick people, elderly people, whatever. Yeah.
They want to be, but there still can be an investigation, and that could be in the zoning ordinance. A maximum parking.
Well, I think that we have our minimum parking requirement in zoning, and I think if we're going to have a maximum, that belongs in the zoning ordinance as well.
and that's an environmental feature of everything.
Go ahead, Darlene.
Okay, the next thing that I have highlighted is on page 60. Speaking of pervious coverages, we have porous surfaces here. We have a provision for that. And this is for streets and also parking lots and other areas. It does indicate that anything that's proposed, any material that's proposed would have to be approved by the city, but we allow the option now. So it would be the engineering bureau that would weigh in on something like that. But we're just allowing some flexibility. In all honesty, we don't know what materials will open up in the future, and things happen. So it's in there. So that's number 15. 16 and 17, there'll be several areas in the book where we talk more about pedestrian improvements and about transit. And this is an example of that. So this is still in the section where we're talking about street requirements. So those are listed there. On the next page, page 61, at the very top, item C, again, talks about bike and pedestrian improvements and transit improvements. All developments shall incorporate these improvements to increase walkability, bikeability, and transit access.
Is there a requirement to show bicycle racks on plans?
Yes, that's in the zoning ordinance. It goes by the magnitude of the parking lot. The larger the lot, the more bike racks you have to put in.
I wonder, and I brought this up before, you know where I'm going. Is there any thought to provision to show transit access stops within a certain, within half a mile, or just to show it on the plans if they're already, well, not even half a mile because the plans never go that far, but if it's out in front, something to take it into account.
We have some transit requirements later on if you
Okay.
want, we'll maybe touch on that. Okay.
Thanks, sounds good.
Just on this page also, 61 item F, I'll just include, we have fee in lieu of improvements. And this goes back to pretty many years ago, actually. There were some improvements on South Mountain, and the residents that lived on South Mountain did not want curb and sidewalk to go in a standard way. They didn't want the roads to be widened. They like the fact that it feels like country roads out there, and we tried to respect that. They were permitted to put in walkways and things like that. And for some of those developers, they did not install sidewalks at all. They gave us the cost of what it would be to install sidewalks, and we use that on other things in the area. We use it for speed humps and signage and other things to slow traffic.
A whole study.
We did a study for the traffic there.
Mhm.
So we added this provision, fee in lieu of improvements. If the applicant proves to the satisfaction of the planning commission that such improvements are not essential at that location at the present time, then we can offer this fee in lieu of improvements, and they would give us some contribution, and we would use it for improvements in an alternate way.
We could waive sidewalks and for a fee.
Well, that would be, I mean, you provide the relief on sidewalks, you'd have to agree with that. But you can require that they put the sidewalks in, then, it costs them a certain amount to do that.
Mhm.
And if they're not putting them in, maybe they contribute to some other improvement in the area.
And it was like a confluence of like 4 developments. So Fire Lane, that one development is finally getting built. There's like two multifamily dwelling buildings, but you'll know up on William Street, the two nice developments up there, all that came in at the same time. And that's where the whole contribution was. It was enough to have a study, which Tiffany, they did an RFP for a consultant to do some traffic calming ideas. Like we said, the speed humps were placed at least on William. I'm not sure about down below. Pardon me?
And Creek Road.
And Creek Road too. Okay. It really was wonderful, and it was quite a while ago, and it worked out perfectly. Those neighbors did not want, especially down on Creek Road. We did it initially. We did a Creek Road one where that beautiful houses right down to the Blair development at the end of Creek Road, and that was the first one that said, these trees are huge. I want to keep it narrow, and it worked out great with John Blair. Yeah, so. It's kind of neat in that area. Yeah, it worked.
I don't know if this is the spot but when you mentioned fee in lieu of, it brought to my mind the Wawa situation in terms of a donation and for the signage, right? Is there somewhere in here that somewhere addresses it? Because I know that was a little vague in terms of, well, we asked them, they don't have to, but I personally don't know if that's within our realm to request that.
Yeah, that one came about because the Wawa needed significant zoning hearing board relief to be able to do that project. And because of that, they offered to the zoning hearing board that they would do some additional, I guess you could say, investment in that site. They offered to put in something that was a welcome to Bethlehem sign there. And so they offered that. And then what we said was we'd rather do it in a little bit of a more creative way. So we thought we could get the community involved and we could do it more as an art piece kind of thing, and they agreed to that, and that's in the proposal. But
I guess
we didn't just ask for that; it was sort of offered by them.
No,
and then
I guess what I'm saying at that moment, for all of us that were here, you remember, I was like, wait a minute, what are we doing here? To avoid that from occurring again, here we are changing it. Can it, Ms. Heller, be worded somehow that if they are seeking X number of variances from zoning or come up with some kind of, I just think that makes council, help me out here.
I think
It takes us off of it, like from a standpoint, I don't want my name attached because I told Wawa, hey, come up with 25 grand for the, you know what I mean? I just think if it's somehow worded, I'm agreeing with what you're saying,
here's
but
what we try to be cognizant of. There are some things that we can require. because they are permitted in the municipality's planning code. Like we can't require off-site improvements. There's a lot that we can't require. There's things that we can incentivize. We can put incentives in here that maybe we can't require something, but it's really the right thing to do when we try to incentivize it.
Right.
And then there's other things that we can't require or incentivize, but we can always talk to a developer and try to negotiate. And that falls under the third category.
And I'm just approaching it from, the buzzword of transparency always comes up. Well, if that negotiation is behind a closed door, well, then let's have some guidelines per se, just
But
so
we didn't ask for it. They offered it. And I think that's a big difference.
you understand where I'm coming from.
I understand.
They offered it. Couldn't someone perceive that as a way of, Eddie, you see what I'm saying? A way of, hey, we'll scratch your back now.
I don't think so, because at a zoning
I don't
hearing,
want that to happen in this venue with our group.
the zoning hearing board is a quasi judicial body, and I think I just stumbled over those words a little, but they really are bound by the provisions in the ordinance. There's very specific criteria of what someone has to show to get a variance. But there's very specific criteria that an applicant needs to show in order to get a special exception. It's a much more, I think, structured and stringent review before a zoning hearing board. There's no scratching. I mean, I think,
Scratch that from the record. I
Yeah,
didn't want to use those terms,
That's
but
scratching.
you understand where I'm coming from. How that person, I had someone who read the article in the paper the next day after Wawa. Someone said to me, "What's going on? What he's making deals with this for a sign or not?" The way a reporter perceives it, and the way something is down to protect everyone, to me that makes sense.
okay, I don't know. You have counsel, but I don't believe there's a way to put that in an ordinance.
Plus,
And
Darlene,
quite honestly,
I-
that should have never. I'll go back to what I said that night. I don't think that should be coming in front of us. Tracy, don't shake your head.
disagree.
Okay, all right.
We're
But I wanna
having
say
a
one thing.
discussion.
I want
We're
to
having
say,
a discussion. Isn't
Okay,
this?
we're doing it on a record where we're talking about what
Yeah.
can go in an ordinance
right,
and what
right,
can't.
Right.
So I think at this point, we can't put that in an ordinance.
right.
Understood.
If we want to talk about that,
Understood.
at another meeting, we can do that. But right now, I think it's what's within an ordinance and what can we require and what can't we.
All I ask is you respect my passion about something
you.
that I don't think
I
know.
got you.
is in our.
I do want to add one thing. I want to add one thing though. I think there was some history to that sign, like we have history to many, many things going on in the city. A welcome sign was something that everyone was, I think they were talking about that in that area well before Wawa came. I think there was some sort of a nexus there. And the Wawa project, was right where the sign was going, that was going to be located. I think there was some history on that.
If you'd like me to continue, I can.
Please.
Okay. So on that same page, page 61, at the bottom of the page, we start to put in provisions here for traffic impact studies. That's a fairly new section in our subdivision and land development ordinance, but we did enhance that here because when Tiffany works with Pete Terry and an applicant, we are very cognizant about pedestrian traffic and things like that. It's not specifically in the ordinance, and we enhance it to include that, especially for some of the buildings that are occurring in the downtown. There really isn't vehicular traffic specifically to that building because we don't require parking. So on the top of the next page, page 62, G, H, I, and J talk about making sure that these projects concur or are compatible with the Climate Action Plan, Vision Zero, our comprehensive plan, things like that. We also include provisions about compatibility with, for pedestrian traffic, bicycle traffic, mass transit, vehicles, trucks, and emergency vehicles. We talk about indoor bike shelters and things like that. So a lot of this is really enhanced so that we're sure that applicants are studying that as well as vehicular traffic. So then on the next couple of pages, I just really highlighted a lot of that. On the top of page 63, we start to list what needs to be included in a traffic study. Item 7, pedestrian paths to and from the entrances of the building. Nearby transit routes and stops are included in number 9. Nearby bike and pedestrian trails and routes is included in number 10.
Is there a set standard for a traffic study? Or can
No, there is.
Bill go out and start counting cars, and because Bill said there were 48 cars, that's what they reported?
Yeah, so every development, still just at the old Saldo, is required to submit trip count. I mean, a lot of them, like the one that was just here today, it's not gonna require trip study, but we still ask them to submit the trip calculations based on ITE, federal, counts. So once they submit that, it's 0 to 50, they don't require a study. 50 to 100 trips in the peak hour require abbreviated study, and then 100 and more require full study. And then in the cell, though, we do go over like what the abbreviated study should include and what the full study should include. And
So-
we give some wiggle room. Like Darlene was saying, you know, some of these developments, like, you know, for a while we had like a radius, like, oh, for a full study, you have to look at like a half-mile radius, or I forget what we had for the signals. I mean, at some point, like on 3rd Street, we're not going to require each development that comes in to study, you know, a half-mile radius of that, because the guy just, the next door just did it a year ago.
So the studies are done by, I'll call an approved,
Traffic engineer.
exactly. They're not, that's my concern.
Explain ITE.
Yeah, sure. It's just.
I don't know what it's
Institute.
The Institute of
of
Transportation Engineering.
Engineer. So it gives each land use, there's a land use code, and they would pick for multi-use housing. or
Got it.
Small farm, and they would just give the trip.
I just wanted to make sure we didn't have someone going out counting cars that, here they are. It's got to be done the right way.
It's an engineered study, and then we have an outside traffic
I know.
engineer that we use as a consultant. That's Pete Terry. He's been here for several meetings in the past. You may have met him recently. So
Formula LLC. Oh, no.
That would never happen.
Continue.
So on the next page, on page 64, item 13, again, we're asking about pedestrian paths and streets within the development. And 14, proposed facilities to accommodate mass transit and bicycle access to the site. And then as you go down further on the page, we just continue to repeat some of those in different types of studies.
So these are all elements of the studies.
Yes.
Good.
And at the bottom of 64, there's a new section, traffic calming measures and crosswalks. I don't really know that we delineate that right now, but we're really more specific about creating pedestrian crossings and calming traffic. And then O on page 65 is our public transit access section. And I don't really know if it's asking in here for a radius of where those routes are. I think it's really talking more about accessibility, creating access, not necessarily showing it on the plan. So maybe that's something that, I know you had mentioned that before, Mr. Malozzi. So to have the plan note where the nearest routes are?
Or just the routes within quarter-mile proximity, or 1,500 feet or something proximity, have, that there's stops within, within a quarter mile. These are the routes that serve this development,
Okay,
for fixed route.
okay.
The rationale being, it would at least, similar to having bike facilities shown, there, it would have to be noted. So that means all the engineers, the owners, the public here, anybody would be, oh, okay, well, it is served by public transportation and it's right there. Yeah.
Okay. We can do that. The next section at the bottom of that page 65, we get into our requirements for recreation areas and fees. The municipality's planning code allows us, because we're not going to create a recreational facility for every single development, we are permitted to ask a developer for fees for recreation that then we put into a common pot, goes into a recreation account. And then that allows us to do some infrastructure improvements and maintenance, et cetera, on existing facilities. And so that's what this chapter is about. It does say in the municipality's planning code that where we collect fees, the fees that we collect should be used in a nearby area. And sometimes that's very challenging to do. So on the next page, item number 4, currently we say that if there isn't anything nearby or if there's not a project, we use the fees at Monocacy Park. And I think what we're going to do is expand that out to some of the other regional parks in the city. So we would expand that out to include Monocacy Way Trail, or the South Bethlehem Greenway Trail, or Sand Island, or the DNL Corridor. Those are each pretty regional trails that parks rather, that many people use. And so that will give us some more flexibility to spend those. So that's at the bottom of page 66. The fees are on the next page, page 67. We haven't done this yet. We've talked about whether or not we should be really increasing those fees, and do those fees really need to be in the ordinance? Maybe they could be by resolution or something like that. On page 71, close to the bottom of the page, we have a new section, green stormwater design. It's in our stormwater management section. We want to just create opportunities where there's a little bit more flexibility with how stormwater is managed. And so we've added a section here addressing rain gardens and other things that, we don't prohibit that now, but I think we just want to put it out on the table that we could look at some flexible options for stormwater in the future. One of the things that's noted here too about native plantings, I think that we try to call that out in several sections of the book. We have landscaping requirements, et cetera, but we want those plantings more and more to be of native species. So that's more in tune, I think, with the climate action plan as well. At the bottom of page 75, and I'm moving pretty quickly, so if any of you have questions, feel free to stop me. At the bottom of 75, we added a section on sidewalks, pathways, and driveway aprons. There's a design here for bump outs. We do allow them and require them in some areas now, but we don't really have in the ordinance specifications. We don't call out bump outs at all. I don't even know if there were bump outs in 1971. So we're just including those here. It's something that we do, but it's called out. On the next page, page 76, we have a little sketch of allowing pervious pavers in between street trees in the public right-of-way. Typically now, I think it's concrete, especially in the core. We would allow opportunities for some pervious surfaces to be included in there. In the downtown areas or commercial areas, it's unlikely that someone's going to, maintain grass and things like that, but we can put pervious surfaces in there. Just below that, item B, pathway or bikeway. Again, there's another section that's a little bit more flexible about Sidewalks, they don't need to be concrete sidewalks necessarily. There may be opportunities for pathways or bikeways in some suburban areas or more rural areas of the city. There are some. Those kinds of modifications would come to you. They would go through Engineering Bureau and they would come to you for you to consider. On page 78, we start to talk about landscaping, street trees and buffers and other landscaping provisions. We want to add throughout that section again about native plantings, native species.
Does
To
this-
work with our city forester about how to, call out what those might include. But we want to put that out there and be more upfront about they should include native species as much as they can.
And is there consideration either now or moving forward here for street trees that are, like maples are highly destructive, right? Sidewalks, pipes, foundations. So I know I had asked the city forester for a park planning we were doing, and there are certain species where the roots tend to go straight down instead of shallow and out all over the place. So that they look for city-friendly kind of street trees.
I guess I'd have to, I never had that conversation. David Schaefer is our city forester. I've never really had that conversation with him. I think maybe we can follow up and check.
Because we're blessed to be Tree City USA designated and all that. But when you walk down the sidewalk in the more mature neighborhoods, particularly the maples, the sidewalks are all lifted, and then we have problems there. The sycamores don't seem to be they don't lift slabs and
Yeah,
they're
they're
just
just
large.
dirty. Yeah.
Yeah, they're dirty.
Yeah.
They're really dirty.
Hang on, we have our
I have
architecture
a-
here.
No, I have a personal answer to that. Recently had a tree die. There is a city document and also online for types of trees that should be planted in various locations next to sidewalks, depending on the space available.
Is that ours or are you?
Yeah,
saying-
he has a
Oh,
guide. There's a
good.
guide.
Good to know.
They have a guide. Now we're improving, like David has been working on this, which is every new development, we specify what kind of trees are going to go in the sidewalk.
Classes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's 1, 2, and 3. Mhm.
And whichever, whether it's
Some
the male or
prohibited
the
ones.
female ginkgo tree drops that horrible fruit, don't plant that on pedestrian ways. Stuff
He
gets
has
on your
some-
shoes. Is
There are some street trees that are prohibited in this little booklet too.
okay.
I'm gonna have to bring some guidebooks.
Yeah. 'Cause I know the maples are all over the place, and it's
My old neighborhood, Silverleaf, over by
Oh.
Bethlehem School District and Admin Building.
on Sycamore.
Sidewalks, half of them,
Uh,
they're gone now because everyone's sidewalk.
Well, you don't plant maples on Sycamore Street. That's the problem.
So I don't have any other
Um,
sections to call out here. I don't know if anyone else from the staff wants.
went over, I saw it briefly, just an explanation, page 70, letter K. Can you explain that one, Ms. Heller?
Well, this is part of the section on recreation
Right.
Fees.
Right.
So this comes out of the municipality's planning code. So envision that is a state law that pertains to
Right.
densely urban cities. It applies to suburbs and it also applies to rural areas. But we are obligated to allow an option for a developer that they can do the recreation fee, or they can do construct their own park basically on their land. And then if the city accepts that, they have an option.
I'm not comparing this to the Wawa sign deal by no means. I think this is one that is something that I would hope that more developers possibly jump on. Historically, do you have an answer? How many have done something like that? Because to me, that's a life long lasting impact. Hey, when we developed this plot of land. See that little playground over there? We paid to put that in. Compared to, here's my, $1,500 rec fee, and I don't know where it went. I know we know where it goes. You mentioned that. Awesome. All those venues you mentioned, definitely. But when someone comes in, are they aware that that's an option for them?
In all honesty, because in the core of the city, we want denser development, it's really not a viable option for most people. If there's a larger piece of land, maybe out, on the northern edge of the
Right,
city or
right.
something like that, it may be an option. There have been some instances where, so if there's a steeply sloped area or a wooded area where a developer has kind of subdivided that off, and then there's a conservation easement on it, they're not permitted to develop on it, and then it stays as open space. It stays as a wooded lot as open space. But we've not, that I can remember, had someone recently actually build a playground on their lot or something like that, unless it's a multifamily, like apartment development, and they want that as a
Like the one we saw.
resident
tonight?
asset,
And that'll be private property.
and then it would be private
This
property.
is public. that we're
That's
talking
true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Understood.
And that's, I guess one concern is there are different levels of quality of we would have to be pretty strict about that. Cause I mean, even in,
Playground,
detention
yes.
basins,
Yeah.
like, you see like people that do it right. And then you see the people that throw mulch around and call it a basin, and it's awful, So at least we'd have control. We'd have to have
Understood.
control.
And I see your point,
Yeah.
Darlene, that it is a rarity. But if it does
Mhm.
allow somewhere, I would think that maybe a developer would say, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to put a nice little playground park deal in there.
It could happen. I mean,
Have
it
to be
really
approved
depends on
then.
Sure. Yeah.
The
which would have to be-
location.
Yeah. Right.
size of the lot.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah.
Tool in our toolbox.
That's the only question I had. Oh, and I lie. Here, you all laugh and yell at me now. Is there something in the chapter on submission of plans that verifies when plans are submitted prior to planning commission review, that they are placed on some compatible technological disk, what have you, so that we can eventually all see it here in the rotunda, in hopes that our new mayor puts another screen on that side, and then everyone in our beautiful rotunda can see and view the plans from the project that's being evaluated. Is there something in there on that?
Well, one
I
thing
think
that-
you said there was, though.
Well,
Didn't you
not
say
for
that?
the screen. What
Not for the screen.
one
but-
thing that we did add, and this is, Basil contributed, or Basil, I'm sorry, contributed to this, but we do require that all plans be submitted electronically at this point. Up until somewhat recently, everything was paper.
Well, I just.
So we still get the paper copies, but we also have an electronic.
I just
version.
think as we evolve, and again, it's a pie in the sky for Ron Malosky to have another, but if we are moving forward in the technology world, I just think it makes sense.
Sure.
If they are submitting an electronic copy, it should be easy when they come. to
Sure.
the
I mean,
commission,
no,
they just plug
no
it in.
offense. We had again, I know I'm a little stickler on this. We didn't have an easel. So here we have the gentleman who didn't mind, but they're holding it up. And if we had someone here tonight,
I think we're moving from the 5 1/4 to 3.5 inch floppies in here. So we're making good headway.
is that listed?
Yeah,
A floppy disk is
Does it
listed.
say that? What page are you in? No.
He's lying.
Oh my God.
That's
We've been
all-
working on this
that's
for a
all.
long time, but not that long.
71.
I will say this though, if for us to be able to project the plan, they have to give us the plan electronically prior to the meeting. So
Yeah.
most of those boards that they brought in, we don't have electronically. They have to give us that.
Yeah,
notice.
and well, it's like anything else. Hey, if you want to get in front of us, make sure you have everything in minute.
Okay.
That wasn't
That's-
really a good
I
thing.
mean, it's
They should
just-
have given it to us ahead of time, those plans.
Yeah. So
And I
to
could've
Rob's
put 'em
point,
up
can
here
that
for
be,
the
is
people
that a
around the audience.
requirement?
Yeah,
It's
The
gotta be-
electronic submission.
gotta
I
be
guess that's
submitted
what I'm
electronically 24 or 48
they
hours
have
in
to
advance.
put it in. What is it? Just like a CAD format for you or something?
Or
Right. I mean,
Easier for us to review it when we are reviewing.
I will work on Mayor Reynolds to,
Definitely be easier for you to look at.
Absolutely. And
do we have a budget line item for technology in the city?
You've seen the electronic plans the last couple months, okay?
Yeah.
But now you're not getting your laptops in
Yeah.
anymore.
Well, and again, not
Not
just
here.
not just for us, but hey, we've been in this room, Darlene, where it's full house.
I know.
And I'm sure that's going to come up down the
if
road.
you go to
for some of-
other township meetings, there's,
I
you
know.
they got them all over the place and all
Oh,
that
they have screens all over.
Oh yeah, like
I have a
Lower
question.
Salkin.
Well, again, I know everyone, Molaski's axe grinding again. He always wants that, but I just,
Ms. Cohen has her finger up.
yes, Mrs. Cohen.
Darlene, you mentioned 2 times that you're going to be adding something to this saldo.
Mhm.
Expansion to other parks besides just Monocacy and
Oh, yeah.
other
you got-
trails, and adding native plant species or something?
Yes.
So are there other, so this is a draft, so it's still being
Lake draft.
revised. Are there
Yes.
any other items that are still getting revised of significance?
I think there's you can see I have Post-it notes all over this, and I have markups in here. I think there's a couple of areas where we still want to add in, maybe we talked about pedestrian improvements and we want to make it pedestrian and bike. I think there's some tweakings like that, but I don't think there's any other larger sections that we want to add.
Okay.
I think that's what we're proposing. Do you want to take some time? If you have questions, that's fine. We can go over those, but we should also talk before we wrap up about next steps and how do you want to continue then?
The salvo.
So
One
that
other
we have some
question?
direction.
Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, Matt has one.
I have
Finger.
my finger in the air.
Okay.
I'm aware that there's an application for a large scale solar development coming up. And is that
What?
something that, yeah, next month maybe?
It's on our sheet.
Yeah, it's on,
Oh, no, I see. It was
But,
submitted already. I thought you meant.
which is a good, because this is, and it's exactly the sort of like, potential for collateral damage, like well-meaning, like climate action, all those things. And then all of a sudden it's where it probably shouldn't be. And there's no plan for it because nobody envisions that kind of thing. So is this an opportunity, not necessarily for that application, but moving forward? Because I know a decade ago or so, New Jersey had some intense tax credits, and they were very large. And typically, water and wastewater facilities, they would put solar covers on their gigantic aerator tanks because but it was all driven by tax credits. I could totally see that happening as the United States is getting this fervor for it, and then it starts getting put anywhere there's an open field, abutting residential. We're going to have the same thing over and over again. View sheds being compromised and all those kind of things. So.
Well, we are working with the EAC, the Environmental Advisory Commission. They drafted the provisions for solar that we have in the zoning ordinance now. And we just had a call yesterday about it. They're working on updates. And one of the things that we would update would be how we might differentiate between someone putting solar on their roof or in their backyard or wherever versus someone who's doing more of a solar farm. And collectively, they have more than one volunteer on their committee that's working on that. And so the wheels are kind of in motion. That would probably go in the zoning ordinance. I don't have a draft of that at this point that I could share, but a zoning amendment would come to you. So you will see that at some point.
Okay. I think it's a very valid
Mhm.
concern. Yeah.
And there is more and more push for model ordinances regarding solar and things like that. It's something that's becoming more popular. So
Right. Well, particularly at a large scale.
yes,
Not-
oh yeah,
not-
definitely.
Like you said, not the rooftop or the,
Right.
one panel in your backyard kind of deal.
Mhm. Yeah.
One of the things I asked Darlene tonight was, is there a timeline? Is March next month a month where the city would like us to act on the saldo and recommend it. And again, not to put words in Darlene's mouth, but you basically said not really, right? I mean,
There's not really a timeline or a deadline for this. I mean, we definitely want to keep it moving. It is a very busy time in the city. I mean, you can see the list of pending
yes,
projects.
which I want to get to last thing before
Okay.
we go.
So I don't know that we would be ready for March, but we would keep it moving. So if not March, I think we would definitely try to look at April.
So knowing that myself, I think Ms. Cohen requested a new copy of the saldo.
Oh.
Is it fair to say, and she has, and we all have one, is it fair to say that everything the dialogue we had tonight, any notes each individual made, kind of perusing again, and are you requesting, Ms. Heller, that possibly in the March agenda we add a saldo follow-up and hopes to come to a final recommendation from us, possibly in that meeting or no later than April?
Yeah.
Is that fair?
So what we would have to get these revisions included. We could do that so that they're called out, that you would know what the revisions are. And then you'd also have to have time to sort of, read it and absorb it. So I just don't know if that's rushing it for March.
And
Or-
isn't the LVPC undergoing a pretty major, an APA, like right now they've got a working group together that's lobbying with the state to make changes to the MPC.
They
So
are.
it's, so if we're just about to do this and then by the end of the year, we got all these great changes and tools that we can do that our regional planning commission's putting in, and, so should we check with LVPC on how that's going? Are you involved with that committee?
Well, yeah, we are. I mean, any change to the MPC, that's a state law. I mean, I think you're being optimistic if you think those changes will be made by the end of this calendar year.
Okay.
And certainly I don't think, certainly I wasn't trying to say March. No, I'm
Okay.
just trying to, as you put it,
moving.
keep it moving along.
Which we.
So
we
whether
wanna
it's
do that.
April, May, what I think, and again, we have one member not present, Mr. Barker, but I think we all at least have some. You did a great job covering what we needed to be informed on,
Okay.
but want to give everyone some time to digest and look at it even more, and maybe have an agenda item for March at the end, saldo follow up, and
Okay.
continue that, and
Okay.
then we'll go from there. What do you? What do you?
Can I just ask
Yes.
right, the new, because I'm looking through the new or draft saldo. I mean, it seems like we've eliminated any kind of mandatory requirements for sketch plans, right?
We don't require a sketch plan. That was one
So-
thing that I think that was requested. We were asked to look whether or not we can require, but
Okay, so when we refer to site plans in the current one, what are it seems like,
this is a zoning ordinance.
right? But I mean that's what we kind of were operating under tonight, right?
Yes.
Okay. So do we have any provisions currently for sketch plan presentations
Recommended, but not
In the saldo,
required.
in our saldo in our zoning ordinance?
we allow for a sketch plan to be submitted
Right.
to the saldo.
Okay,
But not required.
but not required. Okay,
Yeah. And that's kind of one of the reasons I think we tried to use the term site plan here.
For tonight,
because-
yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between a site plan and a
well,
sketch?
that's yeah. So it's kind of do we
Well,
treat them
I
differently?
think the level of detail that's shown on a sketch plan or a site plan is pretty much the same. It's conceptual, you know.
I think of this as more a sketch plan. Other than dimensions, there's not a whole heck of a lot of like hardcore engineering
Correct.
going on. And there's not
Correct.
supposed to be.
Correct.
No.
So do we even need a site plan then? Like, they come in with a sketch and then they go right into preliminary final development of plans?
They can. The difference is in the saldo, we allow you to bring in a sketch plan prior to submitting a finally engineered drawing. In the zoning ordinance, if a land development needs relief through the zoning hearing board, we require that they submit a site
a
plan.
site plan.
With detail and.
There's a whole
And it's,
section
set
on
the
it.
setbacks
level
and
of
all that.
detail is pretty much the same between the two.
Oh.
It's just that we use a
Right.
different term because we're requiring it.
Okay.
I mean, like, I'm paging through the MPC. I mean, there's one reference, a single reference, as far as I can tell, to sketch plans, and it's basically a plan presented for an informal discussion with the municipality. It doesn't even, to me, it doesn't even reference appearing before this body. It almost suggests that it's purely a staffing issue that the city's not bound by or anything
Because
like that.
we have to be careful, like a site plan could start the clock, right? Whereas
No.
a sketch plan is
No.
safe or. what?
Site plan doesn't
No,
start the clock.
well, I don't think the term site plan is even used in the MPC.
For sketch plan, this is all it says. A municipality may informally meet with a landowner to informally discuss the conceptual aspects of the landowner's development plan prior to the filing of the application for preliminary approval of the development plan. The landowner may present a sketch plan to the municipality for discussion purposes only. And during the discussion, the municipality may make suggestions and recommendations on the design of the developmental plan, which shall not be binding on the municipality. That's it.
That's what we did tonight. Why'd we call it a site plan?
Because
we
they
don't-
were requesting variances
Mhm.
and it's required.
Okay.
Required,
them-
yeah.
Right, that wasn't a
No.
sketch, and
So
maybe
if
it
it was just
misworded.
purely planning, no zoning relief, we call it a sketch plan and they.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? You get a few sketch plans when they're massive, like Martin Tower.
That was,
See,
yeah.
but they are like, it's like a big deal, big thing, and they want to tell you what they're thinking about doing. You know, so some larger projects, they come in with sketch plans. They want to do that, but you don't get too many others called sketch plans here often. It's more that site plan section of the zoning ordinance that causes it to go to the planning commission first, and then comments generated could go to the zoning hearing board. You
Because,
know,
I mean, I got to say, like, sitting here, right? This does not feel like an informal discussion about anything. I mean, even right. So yeah, I mean, I'm just when the MPC references preliminary plans, final plans for approval by the planning agency, which can include a planning commission, that language is used specifically. But for sketch plans, it just says it's presented to the municipality for an informal discussion, which suggests that it's just, I mean, to my mind, it's just presented to your office for the discussion. I'm just, again, when we talk about sketch plans and site plans, I say I have a better understanding now that certainly why they should not be interchangeable since, and this does not feel like an informal discussion.
Well, the term sketch plan that you're reading out of there, when it says it could go to the municipality in general,
Yeah.
that's probably like our pre-submission discussion with many developers that you don't even see. You know,
Well,
they
that's-
come here and explain things, you know.
Well, that's why, I mean, under the draft ordinance in the article on sketch plan,
Page 29.
right, I mean, it even says, prior to submitting a sketch plan, applicants for developments are encouraged to informally discuss their proposal with the planning director and/or appropriate city staff. I mean, like, to me, that's almost what the MPC contemplates as the sketch plan, and that's kind of where it goes and as far as it goes. This is just my way of musing whether it's even, or whether sketch plans are even something that the planning commission is, I don't even permitted to review.
Okay, but then
Yeah.
134402 talks about sketch plan submission. The pre-plan consultation is one thing. 134402 is the sketch plan submission. And then A, if submitted, 8 print copies of the sketch and 2 copies of the application should be submitted to the city staff prior to the regular planning commission meeting. City review fee may also be required.
Did you see on the back 1344.03 sketch plan review procedures in the proposed ordinance here? There is a C, the sketch plan should be reviewed by the planning commission. And that's when they want it to be, when an applicant wants it to be. Because they maybe want to get a feel for how the planning commission feels about something before they invest a lot of money in the plan.
Right. A says they wouldn't be bound by the review of the commission.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. It's the optional language is certainly important. I think the question of whether we can require site plans is clearly no. Or
Okay,
size sketch plans, yeah.
Sketch plans.
okay. So that takes care of item number 1 of my follow-up.
It should be encouraged.
Should be encouraged.
Right.
I mean, I yeah.
I think you can always say should be encouraged, right?
But I do see your point, Mazel, that if that were the case, we'd be bombarded where city staff can possibly eliminate a lot of that before it does come to us. So that is much clearer for me now. And
I think I said that, yeah.
so,
So we'll continue on with
yeah, I mean,
including these,
sure.
and then we'll give you a progress update at your March meeting.
and
So,
like,
Darlene, question about your involvement even before that or during. Let's say there's something you happen to, read this one night because it's so exciting, and then you see you want to add something, like a paragraph, like in next week, that I think that you should give it to us so we know. Don't you think, Darlene, that procedure of
sure.
input-
Yeah, well, that's
So
what I said.
instead of, and, if you want
We've
look
had
at it,
dialogue tonight. We have copies.
Yeah.
Go home, digest, come back, March agenda, last item, saldo follow-up, and bring those here
or
if you have
before,
any.
or
Or
beforehand.
before.
Yeah, because we could even make a list of them or
Sure.
something. You know what I mean?
Or before.
Yeah.
Do we have final, or council approves, right?
Council,
We give council the recommendation.
yes.
Here's our draft. We recommend it. They 10-4. Do we want to look at real quick the upcoming agenda items?
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are we canceling the February 17th?
Yes, we will
Oh, good
not.
question.
We will not. Great question, Wilma. We will not be meeting next Thursday.
Okay,
Great
thank you.
question. Yep. Darlene, go ahead.
Oh, you want to go over these?
Yeah.
Oh,
just-
okay. Some of these you can see,
Especially the ones that we might see next month, right?
okay. Well, actually, there's not too much on here that you could see, that you might want to see next month.
Oh,
So we're going to
Or
talk
that
about
you
the
would.
saldo again.
Westgate
Okay.
Mall, Phase 3.
Possibly.
Well, actually,
Is that the bank? Or is that
there's
the,
a credit union.
Right.
And there's a restaurant.
do we know what that restaurant is yet?
No. And then there's some other, and then there's some other,
That's where the bank is going to be. I'm sorry, Darlene.
no, that's okay. Then there's some other revisions that they're making to the part of the mall with the interior shops. And they're going to demolish some of that and reconfigure. So probably you'll see that next month. That's
Right.
very likely.
Right.
So that would be March.
Darlene, there's also, by the way, just regarding March, there's 3 site plans that will most
Well,
likely
we
be
just-
on.
Okay,
Thought of
we
it
got some plans submitted today that were sketch or, and so we haven't even opened them up yet.
All right.
But we got more than one of those just today. So if they are a sketch or a site plan, they almost have to be on the following month. So those could be on.
The Boys and Girls Club has been halted for now, right?
Well, we haven't, no, each of these, so like the Boyd is the next one. You acted on that. That's coming back for a facade approval only. 130 West Gap, that was a site plan approval. You did look at that. That's where the 2 auto body, the non-conforming auto body places are.
Yeah.
On the next page, the Boys and Girls Club. Now, that project went to the HCC. I don't know that did we generate a first letter on that?
And that's the one, that was the banner project, right? Mm-hmm.
So then we're waiting for them to
For them to
resubmit.
submit revised plans.
Yeah, they were waiting for them. to
Help me out with this. What's 413-4? Did we see that one
Not
before?
yet.
East
No.
Third?
There's a Polk Street garage at 3rd and Polk. And that's set back so that some mixed-use building can go in front of that. And that's what this is. It's commercial on the first floor and then residential
That
above.
wasn't in front of us before?
yet,
is it?
No, you acted on the garage that got land development approval.
Okay.
This is for the piece in front of it.
Okay.
Madison Avenue, you did see that as a site plan. 2897 Easton Avenue, you just saw that tonight as a site plan. A little bit further up top, 124 Goodman Drive, that's the solar farm at Lehigh.
Right.
Blake Street Apartments, that's, and actually, Mr. Valani has,
It is his, actually. I think they sold, I think it's somebody.
well, that's one
Small.
single building with multifamily development in it.
Small.
Where's
So
Blake Street at? Is that over by Spring Garden?
you reviewed a,
Spring Garden Elementary
you
on the
reviewed a
back?
zoning map amendment for this Blake Street area. I don't know that it's by,
Decatur.
Yeah,
And-
that's right, yeah.
okay.
That
Spring
was the
Garden,
one,
I put
yeah.
them at the
Yeah.
school.
I know he's, yep, yep, I
Decatur
remember.
and Blake are parallel
Yes,
streets.
yes.
Decatur gets you into that cute little neighborhood. you know.
Yes.
so you did see that before for
Yes.
the map amendment, but this might be the first thing that came
No,
back.
that Linford Street apartments you approved in the past, that was Mr. Valani's
Okay.
on that alley that was made into a small street, yeah.
Some of these on the first page have kind of been languishing for a while. We haven't seen revisions on some of those. So,
All right. Any questions for city staff, planning commission members, anything? Darlene, great job with the first
it's a team,
phase of the salvo.
team effort,
Good job.
honestly.
Tracy,
There's a lot of,
I'm going to be public again. Ms. Samuelson, I said this to her when I walked in tonight. It's like the scene from The Godfather, Mr. Malozzi. She thought she was out and they pulled her back in for at least another month.
Which Godfather
So,
one?
That was God, part 3.
See,
part 3.
I love one
And
and two.
yeah,
I think I
and
did three.
yeah, the worst one. You're right, Matt. So Tracy will be here next month, and if we can, possibly, Darlene, send an email out when we get closer to remind everyone we'd like to thank Tracy after our meeting for her commitment and time for the city of Bethlehem. We'll do that.
we will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If Tracy would like to go out.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
she may
but
not,
If
so.
Matt comes, I don't know.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn.
We have that.
Oh,
Second.
Second motion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
job.
you. Thanks for
Didn't
staying.
go
late.
that long.
Not for